Well, in the Barna stats, one of the things that he mentioned was that only 9% of pastors say they have a resource to help people.
And to not normalize the sin, but like we've said, normalize the conversation towards freedom.
I'm Susan Goss, and as a seasoned therapist of more than 15 years, I'm honored to have had the opportunity to gain so much wisdom from so many people and love passing that knowledge on to others. So join me and some of my favorite friends as we share some tangible truths with you.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Tangible Truth Podcast. I'm Susan Goss, and I still have with me, and I'm so excited, Ted Shimer and Hunter House. We are still talking about pornography and its impact. And so today we're going to take up where we left off, but we're going to start talking about the impact actually on churches.
Yeah.
Hunter, why don't you take the lead?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously uniquely gifted to talk about this because I am a pastor at a local church and it's part of my story. And so I hear people say a lot, Ted, I think you said it earlier, I've said it, of like, churches don't know how to talk about this, don't know how to talk about sexual sin from the front, maybe in like a small group over here in this hidden classroom or something. And I think the reason that we talk about it a lot at Fellowship Bentonville is because it has affected me and it's part of my story. And it's easier to talk about in that regard because I have firsthand experience. I get that not every church has that. Praise the Lord if they don't, in a way, right? That whoever's pastoring and preaching in that context hasn't had to experience that, but that can't be an excuse not to talk about it. And so there are people within every church, obviously looking at statistics, that have struggled with pornography and that are currently addicted. But I would hope in any healthy church, there are also people who have experienced freedom. And so I think one of the things for pastors and churches to consider is, how do we give a microphone to those people and let them share through their own experiences how God has brought them to freedom, and to not normalize the sin, but like we've said, normalize the conversation towards freedom, that we know this exists and we want to paint pictures of beauty and goodness in how God has actually transformed people. Because we talk a lot about like truth, goodness, and beauty, and how all three things are important. A lot of times in today's culture, I think we really understand or are compelled by truth when it's shaped by, when it's couched in stories of beauty. Just saying truth sometimes doesn't compel people. Just here's the facts. But when you can show people a picture of how this truth has transformed somebody, it hits different. And people can see, like we're talking about, those glimpses of hope. Oh, there could be hope for me in this. And so I think whatever the church context, churches have to figure out who are the people that God has transformed in this. And to find those people, you got to start talking about it and letting people know that they can share about it.
That's what I was going to say. You have to start talking about it to find the people.
Yeah.
Because as we discussed earlier in an earlier podcast, a lot of people think they're alone, they're isolated, and they're the only ones. And so they're not talking about it. So
Well, in the Barna stats, one of the things that he mentioned was that only 9% of pastors say they have a resource to help people. And
did you say 9?
9.
Yikes.
And so, how do you address it if you don't really have an answer? It's hey, I'm going to, just give a message. And as we've really started working with a lot of churches and really trying to help them address this from an equipping standpoint, not just from a recovery standpoint. And so, as an example, I was at a church like 5 years ago. Pastor gave a great message on immorality, the Greek word porneia. And at the end, he's like, hey, if this is something you struggle with, we have some small groups and you can sign up at the booth in the back.
Where everybody can watch you go sign up.
How many people do you think signed up at the booth in the back?
Zero.
But we did something at our church, up in Fayetteville, this past January, from the platform, just, shared a little bit of, how pervasive this is and just casting the vision. Hey, this is such a pervasive issue. As followers of Christ, we need to be equipped to understand it so that we can help others find freedom that we know. Hey, come to this equipping meeting. So we had 60 guys show up at this equipping meeting. We talked about the stats. We also talked, hey, if this is something you want to get some help on, hey, here's a 6-week class we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of that, then, we had some small groups. But the front door was, hey, we all need to be equipped.
Right. Asking for a friend.
Yes. Because shame is a very powerful thing that I think so many pastors underestimate. Sign up at the booth in the back. Because then a lot of pastors go, well, I guess nobody's struggling. Nobody really wants to get help. It has to be an equipping issue, because if we're truly going to make disciples of this next generation, we've got to get equipped in this area, because this is a huge struggle.
Huge. Excellent.
The self-deception, is very significant. As an example, I was at a conference in November. I got an email after I did the conference. A guy who's a worship pastor was at the session. He said, I came to the session very confident in my journey with pornography and where I was. Man, I left convicted about my pornography addiction. He had rationalized, well, hey, I'm not looking every day. Hey, I'm free, compared to where I used to be. And this is, he was a church leader. And so just recognizing, most people aren't going to admit they're addicted to porn. They're like, well, hey, I struggle a little bit, but hey, don't all guys. And so, that equipping, going in at it from an equipping angle, I think is, really crucial because of that, because the lies of the enemy, because of shame, and inviting people to get equipped, because in that process, they start being honest with themselves. They start getting hope that, hey, freedom is actually possible. Because it's one of my friends calls pornography in the church Satan's masterpiece. Because of the shame, people don't want to talk about it, and they just stay in the shadows and stay stuck.
One of the questions that you've brought up, Susan, is like, what do we do when we do find out that someone close to us is looking at porn? I think you mentioned with a child, or from my wife when she found out that I was. And I've been on the giving and the receiving end in different relationships with this information. And when I think about, like, what do you do? How do you respond? One of the first things that comes to mind that we tell people is, don't freak out.
Exactly.
It is such a stark thing to hear someone say, and they are expecting you to look at them like, you did what?
Right.
And to meet them with all the judgment that they've built up in their head. And I've experienced both aspects of that. One of the beauties at Fellowship Bentonville, where I'm at now, with Abel Schaefer, with Mark Schatzman, is they have helped cultivate a culture where we can talk about, even as pastoral staff, that we are struggling with different things. And I get there's a level that a standard we have to hold ourselves to, and those types of things. But when I first started struggling with this early in ministry, I didn't know if I can even say something. Like, I didn't know that with my wife. I didn't know that with my boss. I didn't know that in any of those regards. And I think healthy organizations create a space, healthy marriages create a space, healthy parenting creates a space where that person knows, you can bring this to me, and you will still be loved. Yeah, there may be consequences for different things, but the first thing we're going to do is be able to look at each other and say, hey, I love you, and thank you for sharing that with me. And I've learned that principle through receiving that from my wife, if I'm just being very blunt, of her telling me, like, this hurts me more than you can imagine. And at the same time, I want you to know I love you and I'm not going anywhere. Let's process through this. I think for parents, for wives, for husbands, like, just remembering the way in which you receive, it's receiving, not reacting. You can be hurt. You can let it all, it's going to hit you deeply, but you have to receive that and be able to process it in a healthy way.
100%. Your response to your child is everything to your child. Your response to your child, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you've experienced that.
Yeah, sometimes, when we talk about, hey, what are some of those, traumatic moments? I've talked to plenty of guys. It was when their mom caught them with porn and, freaked out. But in the same sense, when it was met with grace and truth, that there was the balance, but there wasn't the freaking out. Because that does just multiply the shame for sure.
I was meeting with a young man not too long ago, and we were processing some of his sexual brokenness and a relationship with his father. I'm like, man, because they were kind of tied together in that he had confessed to his dad when he was in high school and was met with just an overwhelming amount of shame. And like, you did what? I can't believe you would do that. How many times do you think he confessed or opened up to his dad after that?
Never.
No, he went somewhere else.
Yeah.
That door was shut. There was too much brokenness and hurt. Right. And that's now affected other areas. And so with those we love, that's the last thing we want to happen.
Right.
We don't want to push away the thing and not speak truth.
Right.
But we have to, like you're saying, balance grace and truth. And I've always been encouraged, like, how do we do that? Go read Jesus. Jesus balanced grace and truth more masterfully than anyone else that's ever existed. And you watch it and you're like, how did he know to do that? Well, he's God. But can we pick up some principles of when does he lead with this? When does he open his arms? When does he put out the truth? And there's something beautiful there to watch in the way that he interacted with people.
Which, and I think of John 8 with the woman caught in adultery.
100%.
He didn't condemn her.
No.
He said she was, forgiven. But how did he end it with?
Go and sin no more.
Hey, that there's a standard. And so, but both are possible, grace and truth. And I do think there are some parents who think, man, if I just freak out and I'm going to shame them into obedience. And it actually has the very opposite effect. That shame is one of those drivers, of a porn or sex addiction. And, a lot of sex addiction therapists would say shame is the biggest driver. Just that sense of worthlessness and defeat and, hey, I'm not worthy of love. And when that becomes the driver, it drives all kinds of negative emotions that a person has learned to medicate with what? Porn, and it just, feeds the cycle. And so, back to the discussion related to, to churches, building that restorative culture is one of the things we really try to cast a vision to churches, not a punitive culture, but a restorative culture, which is what Galatians teaches us in 6:1. If anyone is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one from any sin, it says. And so that should be, the heart. So that's encouraging to hear, the culture at Fellowship. Most churches don't have a restorative culture or it hasn't been communicated. And so pastors on those staff teams are like, man, I guess I got to get free on my own. And,
I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to. I felt all those things for sure. Can I ask you a question about parenting? So I'm parenting 3 young boys, 10, 8, and 5. I know what I'm doing in regards to these kind of preemptive conversations. Before I tell you that, any insight into what you see the most healthy time to start having these conversations with young kids? Because obviously, we've got what do we do when something's confessed to us, but what about on the front end? What do we do to help shepherd their hearts before they ever step into some of these spaces where they might be exposed?
Yeah. And I think it's important, at a young age, before 5, but just even talking about, body parts and, hey, this is, it's good. And, even just kind of laying a groundwork of, hey, sex is good. And, just, hey, versus it, hey, this is something we've never, talked about, but, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is
Love
a book.
That book. Love it.
And just the concept is really helpful of, you can explain this to a 4 or 5-year-old that, hey, there are good pictures and there are bad pictures. And hey, a bad picture might be when, somebody's, not wearing clothes. Hey, if you ever see one of these, hey, come talk to me, because all of it, I know a dad who had just that conversation with his 7-year-old who came back from the playground and asked him about sodomy. He had not even had the sex conversation,
with the 7-year-old.
7-year-old. but somebody showed him a video on the playground.
Oh my gosh.
And so he came and asked him a question, but because I also have, seen the testimony of a guy who had this very similar experience, and there was shame around that topic in his family. And so he just kept it in the shadows, and man, it led to all kinds of stuff. And so getting the topic on the table,
you can't talk about it enough.
Yeah.
You just can't.
And it's because it's not a conversation. It's an ongoing dialogue.
It's not one thing. You don't put it on a shelf and be like, got that done.
Yeah.
You keep talking about it.
Yeah. Two of the things that Alex and I, my wife, were thinking through, and when we want to start having some of these conversations, and really like we saw the kind of sexual intimacy and good pictures, bad pictures, not as two completely separate conversations, but two that we've had in different stages of. We went really early on the good pictures, bad pictures, because we knew some of that could come from them being exposed to stuff. As they got older, once they kind of hit that age 8, we really started going into the actual, like, what is sex, what is sexual intimacy, in a little more depth. But 8 years old probably feels early to some listeners. It felt early to me as a dad, as I'm going, all right, we're going to actually start. They're going to know everything by the end of this, everything they need to know as an 8-year-old to open up ongoing conversations. But really wanted to do two things. One, be the first to have that conversation with them. That was just big for us. We would rather be too early than too late to have that first conversation. And this, scientifically, you may be able to get some insight, but we wanted to have the mental heart conversation before their body started changing. We wanted them to have the knowledge of God's beauty and God's creation before they just started feeling things and exploring things on their own. Wise, not wise, too early?
No, I think very wise.
Very.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate
wise.
That's
Very,
what
very,
I was
very
fishing
wise.
for that.
100%.
Thank you,
And
Susan.
I mean, it's getting earlier and earlier. Come out to the farm, Hunter, and look at the animals. It's a great teaching spot.
We just got a dog. And she's
a
at
great,
that age.
every time we do a workshop, a sexual, development workshop or whatever, it's the age does get younger. I will say that, because of today's world and the social media, the age does get younger, but 8 is not too young, because, and that's my big argument. You want to be the first one. They are exposed so early. Every child is from a different home, and all homes and all families have different rules. And so some have phone. You can't believe how early some have phones and access to them and stuff. So they're going to be shown different things, and you want to be the very first one to tell the truth. You're always going to be the truth teller. That's also my big advice to my parents. You always tell your children, we are the truth. We will always tell you the truth. And always come to us, as Ted said, ask us any questions. And yes, 7 is not too young. And, there are some stats we've got. Ted has given you the stats, but on children, in our play therapy rooms, we've got kids that are addicted as early as 7. And
to pornography.
Because they've already been exposed. And Ted can give you the stats on how quickly you can get addicted because of the dopamine rush. And so it's just crazy. And 8 and 9-year-olds, you just have to be so careful. But I also want to leave the listeners with hope, because there's so many things we can do.
Yeah. Well, and I think, there's a reason that we have laws in place to keep addictive substances away from the adolescent brain.
Yes.
Alcohol, drugs.
Yes.
Because the adolescent brain is more moldable. And
Not developed. Not developed.
The pathways go deeper. And so that's what makes the whole porn conversation, and we see it on the college campus. Every year, the freshmen come to the college campus with deeper and deeper addictions to porn because they started younger and younger. And it's shaping, how they view life and sex. I don't know if you guys read this. It came out maybe April of 2024. This study, it was published in the New York Times. But it really just shows, man, how pornography is shaping a culture's view of sex. 5,000 college women in Michigan were surveyed. 66% of them said they were choked during sex.
I did.
Strangled during sex.
Yes.
Because that's what they've learned sex is.
Right.
Oh, man.
Because it's been so twisted.
Yes.
And so, back to the point.
It's awful.
Is, hey, we're either going to shape our child's understanding of sex and what it is, or the world is. And pornography is going to be their sex education.
Yes.
And one more point of encouragement is that we all need community in this.
Yes.
Even just as a parent, like I don't want to run this journey with my kid by myself. I'm a pastor. I've experienced this and I still feel so unequipped sometimes. And so I need the other men in my life, older, who are pouring into me, but also fellow dads of kids that age. I had a dad call me yesterday and say, hey, our kids are going to be entering junior high in 3 years. Can we start meeting monthly and just start praying for them and their friendships and their holiness? I'm like, dude, thank you.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't know that I would have come up with that idea on my own, even though it's as simple as prayer. We need other people. And so to the listener, like this is something to do alongside the people of your church, the people of your community, those that you trust and are in this together.
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up because parents need parents that are talking together about this, that sense of community around this issue, because together we can work together to help our children, because they're with their friends, and it would be great to band together and pray over our children about this issue. This would be wonderful. And man, we're done with this one.
I could talk for 3 more hours.
I know. Well, we've got one more episode left that we can continue talking, and I love where we're going with this. There's hope in this conversation. So listeners, stay tuned. We've got one more episode. This is just a wonderful conversation on this much needed topic that we need to talk about more and more and more. So stay tuned. We love you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Tangible Truth Podcast, part of the KLRC Podcast Network.